My name is Gary Mason, Reverend Doctor, and my background is in psychology and theology. I've worked in the area of peacebuilding now for 35 years, primarily in the Irish context, particularly in that Northern Irish peace process. But in the last 10 plus years, I've been working more extensively in the Middle East, really looking at some of the lessons from our peace process and their possible applicability to that contested space. I'm at USIP with relationships I've had here going back 6 or 7 years, and just reconnecting, trying to share a little bit about my experiences with my colleagues in USIP. I think one of the key things is patience. This did not happen overnight. I mean, really, right through the conflict. So I often say, as long as there was a war, there were talks about peace. So our conflict breaks out summer 1969, and interestingly, common wisdom of the day said that when British troops arrived in that northern part of Ireland, many people were saying, this will be over by Christmas. It ended up the longest military operation in British history, and your viewers need to remember the British have fought an awful lot of wars. So it was important that religious actors were there for the long term. They weren't dipping in and dipping out again. And that just made such a difference. So I'm looking at the Middle East, which most people see as a very, very contested space. The role of religious actors in that is absolutely key. We could argue, is it a religious conflict? Is it an identity conflict? Is it a land? I would say that all those components are bubbling about, sometimes below the surface, I would say, and sometimes above the surface as well. I think religious actors, as I look particularly at that Northern Irish space, we were able to take what I call thoughtful, strategic, prophetic risks that some other people couldn't. We were not necessarily, although we grew up within a particular tribe, I think we realised that our faith had to transcend differences and build bridges over those differences. So many faith actors took really risks to engage, particularly with those who were pursuing political violence, and really creating what I kind of called a moral framework, really asking these people questions like, is this the future you want for your children and your children's children? Or are there other ways that we can explore in this tiny island of Ireland to handle our differences? And that was key in some of those early days. I mean, I knew both the British, Irish and American administrations couldn't necessarily talk to people who at that times were non-state armed actors, but religious people were able to step into those difficult contested spaces in a way that many others weren't. I think one of the key things, people coming from a religious persuasion, I would look at that in two ways. I think growing up in those spaces where there has been conflict and difficulty, I think religious actors have this ability to develop relationships that very, very few professions can actually develop. When we have, most times, accessibility to people's homes in a way that many other professions don't, and it almost becomes a birth to death relationship as well. I look at families that I knew 20, 25 years ago who would still stop me in the street and remind me, oh, do you remember you did a funeral for this person, or you baptised my child? So I think the longevity of those relationships as a person who's been involved in peace building brings trust and also understanding. And I think that's a key component, to know that we're not coming here to impose something on you, but for the greater good of humanity. I want to hear your story, I want to understand your pain, but most of all, I want you to thrive as a human being made in the image of God.
shirkadda iibinta iyo kireynta guryaha iyo dhulalka ee AAA Properties haddii tale ay kugu xumaato taah iyo tiiraanya la tiicaysay soo jireen baa yiri wax la helo haddii la haleeyana la halo talaa jirtee aan kula taliye tilmaamtayda raaco ha turanturoon shirkadda AAA waxaad ka helaysaa kireynta iibinta iyo suuqgeynta dhulalka isteetiyada iyo apartmentyada guryaha ay ku fududeyn karaan si aad ugu tamashlayso waxay ku kala yaalaan xaafadaha Islii, Parklands, South Sea, Soikimau, Nairobi Metropolitan iyo ismaamulada kale ee Kiambu, Murang'a, Kajiado iyo Machakos. Dhulalka iibka ay ku hayaan waxay ku yaalaan Kagundo, Eastern Bypass, wadada Thika iyo Mombasa Road. Shirkadda waxay iibisaa dhulal iyo guryo la hubo mulkiyadooda iyo lahaanshahooda iyo heshiis sharciyadiisa u dhammaystiran tahay. Tunisia iyo Uganda iyo Tripoli iyo Togo, Soomaali dhammaanteed talo waxay ku gooyeen shirkadda Triple A Properties anfacday la yaab kale degdeg aan u gaarno. Wixii faahfaahintaasi dheer kala xiriir eber 7 2 eber 9 eber 8 6 9 5.